Now if I go back to my drawing view, on the lower arm, what I'd like to do now is pretty much the same thing I did with the upper arm. I'll take this drawing layer here and I will convert that ellipse to a brush stroke, and then I can go back and use my cutter tool to remove that artwork, and then I can paint back in with the fill there. So in both cases you want to have the artwork completed on both sides, but you're going to delete sort of the opposite side of the circle. And when you go back and look at this from your camera view now again, and you can check out to make sure that that's going to rotate really nicely around that pivot. But clearly this isn't completely finished because you can see that I still see the line there. And what we want to do with this circle joint is we want to actually get rid of the line. And the way that we can do this very effectively in Animate Pro and Harmony is by using these sublayers that we have available here. And I always want to keep the completed artwork in one of these layers. So I'll keep the completed artwork in my line art layer. But what I'll do is I will select the completed artwork from the line art layer and I'll copy it, Control C, and then I can go to my color art layer and I can paste it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this color art layer to define the patch that I'm going to layer on top. So the only thing I need to do now is I just get rid of where that line overlaps there. And then I want to do one additional step, and I can take my my contour editor tool and I can just hit Control to add a couple of control points, or you can see where the control points are there right now. And then I can just kind of drag it over like this, and that's going to get rid of the line, or make the line kind of a sharp point, because we want to define a nice crease around where that elbow is. And if you've got a lot of extra points here, then you can delete some of those points to get it looking nicer. And I'll just do the same thing on this side. So it looks like I have a little extra piece there from the top, so I can delete that piece if I want to. And go back to my contour editor, and then I can add a contour point here on the line, and then I can just drag that over. And that's going to create a really nice line there for me. So then I can get rid of this extra piece there. So what I have in the end when I look at my artwork is on my lower arm layer, which is the layer that is going to be sort of on top when I rotate the arm, I have in my line art the completed artwork, and then I have in my color art this artwork that is almost complete but is missing the end on that line, and then you can just make a really nice crease there. Now if I go back to my camera view, of course at this point I'm still not seeing what I want to see, and the reason is because I need to define how I want those layers to overlap. So we do this now in Animate Pro and Harmony through our network view, and I can check out where my upper arm and my lower arm are with relation to my composite, and it looks like I have an extra composite there. I can just delete that one. And so I can see that my upper arm right now is underneath the lower arm. Remember that things that show up on the left are going to be on top. And so what I'll do is I'll just slide the lower arm underneath the upper arm. And then what I can do is I can just take this lower arm layer here and I can copy and paste it. And when you copy and paste it in the network view, it creates a clone of that layer. And clones will share the same exposure. So when you are animating this thing, you don't have to animate both clones separately. You can animate them as one. But when you connect both of them to your composite, then it allows you to do some special things. Like I can take the clone and I can go inside the layer properties by clicking on the yellow options box. And then in my drawing layer properties, I can tell it not to show me the line art on that layer. And I can turn off all the ones except color art, because pretty much color art is the only one I'm going to be using here. And now when you take this layer and you rotate the layer, then you can see that it is going to have a really nice crease when you rotate that one. Now when we're working in Animate Pro and Harmony, usually we recommend that people work with peg layers, and what that means, and actually I can do this from my timeline if I want, and so I can just add a peg layer by clicking on the Add Peg button, and it will even name it appropriately. And then I can connect that to both of those clones, and now if I use that peg layer to rotate the arm, it's not quite going to rotate properly because I need it to rotate from the same pivot that I defined on that drawing layer. So if you go inside your drawing layer's layer properties one more time, then in here you can see Use Embedded Pivots, and you can apply the embedded pivot on the parent peg. And what this is going to do now is it's going to allow me to rotate the parent peg, which is this one right here, using the pivot that I already defined on the lower arm layer. So this is one way of doing things. I mean, with compositing, the really cool thing about having the compositing directly in here is that there are multiple ways of doing things. I showed you how to do it with a clone, but there's also another way that I'll show you very rapidly. I will just get rid of that copy of the lower arm that's going in there, and I'll go back in here and apply the embedded pivot on parent peg for that original arm. So in this case, another thing that I could do, just to show you rapidly, is I could go into my lower arm layer, and if I go into the filter tab, I can use the filter tab just to filter out the color art of that layer. And then if I do that, I can stick the color art on top, and once again, if I rotate from the peg layer, it's going to rotate both of those drawing layers. In this case, since I didn't use a clone, I can also rotate directly from the drawing layer. And there's no particular advantage or disadvantage to using a clone or to using a filter. The only difference is that I think that sometimes the network view can get a little convoluted if you have a lot of pipes going into these filters. But the advantage of doing it with the filter is you can animate directly from the drawing layer as well if you want to. So it's kind of a personal preference thing. And the last thing that I'll just mention is if you are animating on peg layers only, you can also turn off, if you go inside your Advanced tab in your layer properties, you can turn off Animate using animation tools. And what that will do is it will prevent me from being able to animate on the drawing layer. Whenever you will rotate something, you see that I'm rotating on the arm layer. I have the arm layer selected, but it's putting the keyframe on the peg layer. And so that's just something to be aware of that can make your life easier if you are animating with pegs. Another thing that can make your life easier when you're animating with pegs is if you go to your transform tool layer properties, you'll see that there is a layer property in here that says peg selection mode. And when you click this on, what happens is when you click on a drawing, it selects the peg instead of selecting the drawing. And this way you know that you're going to put the keyframe on the peg layer and not on the drawing layer. So that's all I wanted to show you this week. That is how to create the circular arm joint. So the important thing is if you're going into your your drawing view and you're checking out what the layers look like, you'll have your upper arm layer that has the completed artwork, and then you'll have your lower arm layer that has the completed artwork in the line art, and then in your color art layer you can put the completed artwork but minus the end. And you might wonder, well, why don't I just use this one? Instead of using both the line art and the color art, why don't I just use the color art? And let me show you this. If I take away that line art layer from underneath, if I rotate this to a certain degree, if I rotate it far enough, then you start to see little bits and pieces that will show up, like little gaps. And those gaps, you might not care about those gaps, but if you do care about things looking perfect, then those gaps aren't very pretty. And if you have the completed artwork layered underneath it, you see how it fills that gap in. If you're using Animate, it's a little bit harder to get this system working where you can have the one on top and the one underneath. So in that case, you can go ahead and just do the patch without having the layer underneath. And you can still get a pretty good looking arm, particularly if you use a circle for the joint. It really also just depends on the shape of the arm. Sometimes the gaps show up more depending on what shape the arm looks like. So that's it for this week. Really simple, easy, how to do a circular arm joint. I know I went through that really fast, so I recommend that you try it out. It's a very effective way of doing joints on cutout characters. And then next week I'll show you how we can take this a step further and create an arm that we can do the reach behind on, so that you can switch the arm from being in front of the body to being behind the body. Thanks, see you next week.